Kimberly Corman sat in her car at a red light, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. She was heading to Daytona Beach with her friends for a weekend getaway, but something felt off. The radio played a cheerful song, but the lyrics seemed ominous. She glanced at the cars around her. A logging truck loaded with massive tree trunks, a family in a minivan, a group of teenagers blasting music. Then her vision blurred. The world slowed. The light turned green, and as cars began to move, a chain reaction of chaos unfolded. A truck swerved, colliding with a car. Tires screeched, metal crunched, and the logging truck lost its load. Tree trunks rolled across the highway, crushing cars like toys. Kimberly's car was flipped, her friends screaming as flames engulfed them. She jolted awake, gasping for breath. She was still at the red light. The accident hadn't happened yet. It had all been a vision. Panicked, Kimberly blocked the intersection, screaming for everyone to stop. Thomas, not far away, rushed toward Kimberly upon seeing the commotion. She quickly explained her premonition and the impending disaster, but Thomas, skeptical, thought she might be having a mental breakdown, folded exactly as she had seen it. Just as tensions rose, the lumber truck they had narrowly avoided earlier sped past them, its massive load swaying dangerously. In the tense standoff, everyone froze, their attention fixed on the truck. But before anyone could react, an out-of-control truck came barreling toward them. Thomas, acting on instinct, grabbed Kimberly and pulled her to safety just in time. The truck crashed into the pileup, obliterating the cars and killing everyone inside, including Kimberly's friends. The survivors stood in stunned silence, the weight of the tragedy sinking in. Witnesses were soon brought to the police station for questioning. Kimberly's account of foreseeing the accident reminded Thomas of the Flight 180 crash a year earlier, which was infamous for the strange deaths of its survivors. Coincidentally, the date of the highway disaster was exactly 1 year after the plane crash, but no one seemed to connect the dots. Thomas, though skeptical, had no evidence to hold Kimberly or the others, so he reluctantly let them go. But death had no intention of stopping its pursuit. After returning home, Evan Lewis tried to shake off the horrors of the day. He casually tossed a container of leftover noodles out the window, unaware of the chain reaction it would trigger. As he prepared to cook dinner, he accidentally spilled oil on the stove. A strange gust of wind swept through the kitchen, extinguishing the flame, but leaving Evan perplexed. He turned to investigate, and a plastic ornament fell into the pot of food unnoticed. Distracted, Evan placed the pot in the microwave and set it to heat. Feeling lucky after winning the lottery the day before and narrowly avoiding the highway disaster, Evan admired the new gold watch he had bought, but his luck was about to run out. The microwave exploded, startling him. In the chaos, his gold ring slipped off his finger and rolled into the drain. Desperate to retrieve it, Evan reached into the drain, but his hand got stuck. He struggled to free himself, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't pull it out. Meanwhile, the spilled oil on the stove reignited and flames began to spread. Evan grabbed a towel, trying to smother the fire, but in his panic, he knocked the pot to the ground. The flames grew, consuming the kitchen. With one final effort, Evan managed to free his hand. He smashed a window and climbed out onto the fire escape, narrowly escaping the explosion that destroyed his apartment. As he prepared to descend, Evan discovered that the safety ladder wouldn't lower. He stood on it, shaking and trying to make it move. But just as he was about to leave, he slipped on the noodles he had tossed out earlier. The ladder gave way, and Evan fell to his death. That night, the survivors learned of Evan's demise through the news, shocking everyone. Kimberly, determined to understand what was happening, researched the Flight 180 crash. She discovered that one survivor, Clear Rivers, had voluntarily checked into a mental hospital. Desperate for answers, Kimberly visited Clear. The hospital's visiting conditions were strict. No sharp objects or electronic devices were allowed, and the walls of Clear's room were padded. Clear had devised this method as the only way to thwart the Grim Reaper. Clear explained that death followed a sequence, reclaiming those who had escaped their fated deaths. Kimberly mentioned being saved once before, but Clear immediately realized that this time, the order was reversed. She didn't know why, but she advised Kimberly to observe her surroundings closely and wished her the best of luck. When Kimberly pleaded for help, Clear firmly declined, her demeanor cold and indifferent. Frustrated, Kimberly bluntly stated that Clear's current state was no different from being dead. Kimberly returned to Thomas, the only person who still trusted her. As they discussed their next steps, Kimberly noticed something strange in the reflection of a glass window. A flock of pigeons swooping in, but when she turned to look, there was nothing there. She immediately thought of Clear's advice and realized these might be the clues Death was leaving behind. At that moment, in a nearby dental clinic, a mother and son were preparing for a tooth extraction. A pigeon suddenly crashed into the clinic's window, startling everyone. Outside, Nora Carpenter waited in her car, unaware that a water pipe next to her fish tank had started leaking. Water flowed slowly down the wires toward her. Inside the clinic, Tim, the dentist's assistant, struggled to breathe as his oxygen tank lost power due to the leak. A decoration from above fell into his mouth, causing him to suffocate. Just as he thought he was about to die, a nurse appeared in the nick of time, saving both Tim and the mother and son. Kimberly and Thomas arrived at the clinic shouting, "Watch out for pigeons!" Tim, misunderstanding, thought they were joking and playfully leaped toward the pigeons on the ground. The frightened birds caused a worker to inadvertently touch the operating rod, shattering the glass and killing Tim instantly. Meanwhile, Clear remembered how her boyfriend had saved lives before his death. Inspired, she decided to leave her padded room and help Kimberly and the others. She led them to a funeral home where they met William Bloodworth, a coroner who had dealt with Death's design before. William explained that to truly escape Death, they needed to introduce new life into its plan. Only then could they force Death to start over. As they processed his words, Kimberly had another premonition. She saw someone driving a runaway truck into a lake. Thomas immediately remembered a survivor from the highway accident, a pregnant woman named Isabella. If she gave birth, the child's arrival would disrupt Death's plan. They quickly located Isabella through surveillance footage and rushed to find her. While searching for Isabella, Thomas gathered the remaining survivors to keep them safe. However, Nora, grieving her son's death, had lost all hope and left the group. Eugene, skeptical of their theories, followed her. As they departed, Rory was struck by falling debris. The swaying light bulb above him eerily resembled a hook, and Rory called for help. Nora crouched to pick up the phone, but Thomas warned her about the hook. Startled, she stood up, only to have her hair caught by a real hook. Terrified, she struggled wildly as the elevator doors closed on her head, lifting her off the ground. Her companions could only watch in horror as she died. Eugene, traumatized, grabbed Thomas's gun, determined to end his life before Death could, but even after firing 6 shots, he remained unharmed. Thomas, puzzled, examined the gun and found it fully loaded. Death's twisted sense of humor was on full display. Upon receiving the news of Eugene's failed suicide attempt, Kimberly, Thomas, and the others quickly drove to find Isabella, the pregnant woman who held the key to disrupting Death's design. As they sped through the streets, they chatted nervously, realizing to their horror that they had all escaped another death by being part of the Flight 180 survivors' deaths. From the moment Clear and the others had gotten off the plane, they had not only changed their own fates, but also influenced everyone and everything they came into contact with. This meant that if the first survivors had not gotten off the plane, the people in the cars would have died in other accidents. To compensate for this chain reaction, the Grim Reaper had reversed the order of deaths. As Kimberly and Thomas drove, their car suddenly had a blowout, narrowly avoiding a collision with an oncoming pregnant woman's car. Both vehicles swerved in time, but Kimberly's car veered uncontrollably into a roadside farm. Eugene, who had been riding with them, was impaled by a metal pipe through the lungs, his screams echoing through the night. Gasoline began to flow into a nearby pipe. Firefighters arrived, preparing to use their tools to remove the car door and rescue Kat, but in the next second, Kat's cigarette butt fell to the ground. A gust of eerie wind carried the burning ember into the pipe, igniting the gasoline inside. The flames raced back to the reporter's vehicle, causing it to explode in a fiery blast. The Grim Reaper, hastening its steps, instantly claimed 2 more lives. The remaining survivors rushed to the hospital, desperate to save Isabella and her unborn child. During the drive, Kimberly once again glimpsed the future. She saw someone lying on a hospital bed, a doctor named Kalargian attempting to strangle her. They immediately connected this vision to Isabella giving birth in the delivery room. Kimberly, Thomas, and the others reached the hospital just in time, following the broadcast to the delivery room. Simultaneously, Eugene was receiving treatment in a nearby room. However, the door and ventilation duct suddenly closed automatically, and the oxygen tube disconnected. The oxygen machine shifted, its wire straightening until it pulled the plug, instantly cutting off the oxygen supply. Eugene, already struggling with damaged lungs, gasped for air. Thomas and the others managed to stop Dr. Kalargian before she entered the delivery room, ensuring the baby was successfully delivered. On the other side, the emergency power of the oxygen machine kicked in, and Eugene's breathing gradually stabilized. For a moment, it seemed they had won, but in the next second, Kimberly had another premonition. She saw Isabella surviving the car accident. She wasn't even on the Grim Reaper's list. The birth of the child had nothing to do with them. Now, Kimberly's vision shifted. She saw a pair of blood-stained hands driving a car into a lake. Dr. Kalargian wasn't trying to strangle her, she was trying to save her. But the person in Kimberly's dream never revealed their face. Clear immediately realized the next victim was Eugene. They rushed to his room, but as they opened the door, the leaking oxygen tank exploded. Thomas tackled Kimberly to safety just in time, shielding her from the blast. However, Kimberly's hands were scratched, and she instantly realized the truth. The person she had seen in her vision was herself. She had to act quickly. Kimberly sprinted to the ambulance parked at the hospital entrance and sped toward the lake she had seen in her vision. She drove the vehicle into the water, submerging it completely. Thomas, realizing what she had done, dove into the lake to save her. When Kimberly woke up from unconsciousness, she saw Dr. Kalargian still being resuscitated. She knew she had gambled correctly. As the one saved first, she should have been the last to die. But by feigning death early, she had disrupted Death's plan. Thomas wouldn't be the next target. Kimberly had tricked the Grim Reaper, for now. Months later, Kimberly and Thomas visited a farm to thank the people who had helped them survive. For a moment, it seemed like they had finally escaped Death's design. But as they spoke with the farmer, a chilling detail emerged. Rory, one of the survivors, had saved a man named Brian during the accident. This act of heroism had disrupted the natural order, and Death was still watching. As Kimberly and Thomas processed this revelation, a sense of dread washed over them. The signs were still there, ominous and inescapable. A tractor nearby sputtered to life on its own, its blades spinning dangerously. A chain reaction of events began, each more horrifying than the last. Kimberly and Thomas barely escaped with their lives, but the message was clear. No matter how far they ran, the shadow of the Devil's Flight would always follow.